So, you are standing on a desolate, wind-scoured spur of rock, high up on a plateau,
Right.
and thousands of tons of carved, fitted stone just sit beneath your boots. To your west, the land violently plummets away into these massive, jagged ravines, dropping all the way down to the Dead Sea.
It is a terrifying drop, honestly.
Yeah, and out in the arid expanse below you, an army of 30,000 men is arriving.
Yeah.
And they have the express purpose of starving you out, smashing those walls to dust, and literally ending your kingdom.
I mean, it is a terrifying scenario to try and put yourself into.
Told you.
You were describing a location that wasn't just built to survive the sheer brutality of the Levantine desert,
Yeah.
It was built to dictate the fate of every single person living in it.
Right, because we are standing in the 12th century, looking at the mighty fortress of Kerak. And this isn't just a castle, is it?
Oh, no, definitely not.
It's the specific geographical choke point, and the massive stone walls built on top of it served as the ultimate flashpoint between two clashing civilizations.
Exactly.
So our mission in this deep dive is to explore how a single piece of medieval military architecture, combined with a seriously obsessive, bitter personal rivalry between two commanders, triggered the complete and total collapse of the Crusader Kingdom of Jerusalem.
And the chain of events here is just phenomenal.
It really is.
You have audacious military logistics, surreal moments of psychological warfare masking as chivalry, and a fatal clash of military doctrines that ultimately rewrote the map of the Middle East.
And to guide us through the sheer mechanics of all this history, we are grounding our entire conversation today on a deeply researched, highly comprehensive study put together by Mick Prichter.
Yes, his work is incredible.
You can find it over at battlefieldtravels.com. And what makes this source so vital, I think, is that it completely avoids the trap of just being dusty library work.
Right. It's not just academics in a room.
Exactly. This study is built on a rigorous combination of primary historical sources, first-hand physical exploration of the battlefield itself, and modern GIS terrain analysis. We are getting the tactical layout exactly as it was from the ground up.
Which is absolutely essential. I mean, you cannot understand medieval warfare, or really any warfare for that matter, if you don't understand the dirt and the rock they were fighting over.
Okay, let's unpack this. I want you, the listener, to step right into the boots of a 12th century military strategist. You're looking at a map of the Levant in the late 1100s.
Okay, let's set the board.
Yeah, what are the actual geopolitical stakes right now?
Well, if you are looking at that map around the 1170s and 1180s, you are watching a massive power shift.
Right.
The Crusader Kingdom of Jerusalem has existed for nearly a century at this point. They had established a foothold, built their castles, and settled into the landscape.
Made themselves at home.
Right. But their position was becoming incredibly precarious, entirely because the political weather around them was changing.
Because the fragmentation they relied on was disappearing, wasn't it?
Exactly. Let's look at the prior decades. The Crusader states survived, largely because the Muslim world surrounding them was fractured.
Like, deeply fractured.
Yeah, you had the Fatimids in Egypt, the Zengids in Syria, and various independent emirs and viziers who spent as much time warring with each other as they did fighting the Crusaders.
So they were basically keeping each other busy.
Exactly. But that era of division was abruptly ending. The Islamic world, stretching from the wealth of Cairo all the way up to the military power centers of Damascus and Aleppo, was being forged into a single entity.
The Ayyubid Caliphate.
Right, the Ayyubid Caliphate.
And the architect of that unification is a name most people have probably heard, right? Saladin Yusuf ibn Ayyub. Saladin.
Saladin. And he is a fascinating figure to analyze from a strategic perspective.
Because he wasn't just a guy swinging a sword.
No, not at all. He wasn't just a battlefield tactician. He was a grand strategist who deeply understood logistics, diplomacy, and the fragile nature of coalitions.
Right. Holding an empire together takes work.
It takes immense work. He spent years slowly, methodically, bringing various Muslim factions under his banner, often through diplomacy, but sometimes through force.
Whatever it took to unify them.
Exactly. His overarching goal was to create a unified front to surround, isolate, and eventually crush the Crusader states.
But right in the middle of this grand unified map he's trying to draw, acting like a giant, heavily armed roadblock, is Kerak Castle.
A massive roadblock.
Yeah, the Crusaders called it Krak des Moabites, built around 1140 by a commander named Pagan the Butler. So talk to me about the geography here. Why does this one specific pile of stone matter so much?
Well, if we connect this to the bigger picture, The location of Kerak is the exact reason it was an intolerable threat to Saladin's empire.
Okay, lay it out for me.
It sat directly astride the ancient King's Highway.
Right, the main road.
Yeah, this was the vital, millennia-old north-south artery that linked Damascus down to the Gulf of Aqaba and ultimately all the way to the holy cities of Mecca and Medina.
So it's everything.
It's everything. It was the absolute nerve center for trade caravans, for military communication, and crucially, for religious pilgrimage between Egypt, Syria, and Arabia.
So if I'm translating this into a modern military context, Kerak is basically a heavily fortified forward operating base.
Yeah,
A massive FOB. And the Crusaders have basically airdropped this FOB directly onto the enemy's primary main supply route.
that is exactly what it is.
So whoever commands that FOB completely dictates the operational tempo of the entire theater. I mean,
Yeah.
you can choke off trade, you can sever communications between Cairo and Damascus.
And you can project offensive power deep into the enemy's rear echelon.
Right. That is a huge deal.
It is. That is a highly accurate military analogy. Kerak was not built to be a defensive bunker where knights just hid out and waited.
It wasn't a panic room.
No, it was a springboard. It was designed for force projection. And that brings us to the man who was using that springboard to maximum effect.
Reynald of Châtillon.
Reynald of Châtillon. He became the Lord of Transjordan, the vast territory encompassing Kerak around 1176.
And his leadership style, his entire operational doctrine really was the absolute polar opposite of Saladin's, wasn't it?
Oh, completely.
Let me stop you there, because the contrast between these two men feels like the engine driving this entire conflict.
It really is the core of it.
Right, so if Saladin is the calculating grandmaster playing a slow game of geopolitical chess, how would you describe Reynald? Because the source paints him as reckless and incredibly aggressive.
Reynald is the guy who looks at the chessboard, kicks the table over, and sets the room on fire.
Wow, okay.
He was a pure opportunist. To understand him, you have to look at his history. He actually spent 15 years as a prisoner in an Alapan dungeon before becoming the Lord of Kerak.
15 years, that is going to mess someone up.
Deeply. When he finally got out, he was embittered, highly aggressive, and seemingly immune to the unwritten rules of medieval engagement.
You don't care about chivalry?
Not at all. He used Kerak, exactly as you described, as an offensive staging base to launch deep, unpredictable raids far beyond the Jordan Valley.
Right.
He plundered trade caravans, he extorted merchants, he attacked lightly defended Muslim towns.
But wait, wasn't that just standard frontier warfare for the era?
Yes and no.
I mean, was Reynald actually a strategic genius, waging a brilliant campaign of asymmetric warfare to keep the Ayyubids off balance? Or was he just a glorified pirate who happened to own a really big castle?
That is the million-dollar question. The chroniclers of the time, both Christian and Muslim, grapple with that exact issue.
Because it's hard to tell if he's crazy or brilliant.
Right. Tactically, his constant raiding did force Saladin to divert resources to protect the supply lines.
Oh, okay, so it worked a little bit.
But strategically, it was disastrous. Saladin was trying to build a cohesive Islamic front, and his authority rested heavily on his role as the protector of the faith.
And the guarantor of safety for pilgrims traveling to the holy cities.
Exactly. So Reynald's actions weren't just military strikes. They were direct, humiliating challenges to Saladin's political legitimacy.
So the tension is building. You have a massive geographical choke point and two commanders who fundamentally cannot coexist.
Right.
But a castle is just stone until someone uses it to spark a powder keg. And Reynald is about to launch an operation that is so audacious, it almost sounds like historical fiction.
You are referring to the Red Sea expedition of 1182 to 1183.
Yes.
This is the exact moment the conflict shifts from border skirmishes to total war.
Walk me through the mechanics of this, because my mind is blown by the sheer logistics here.
It's wild.
Reynald decides he wants to raid the Red Sea coast, right? To strike directly at the Muslim Holy Lands, the soft underbelly of Saladin's empire.
Right.
But there is a massive problem. Kerak is completely landlocked.
Very landlocked.
It is sitting on a dry, rocky plateau. So what does he do? He decides to build a navy in the middle of the desert.
Yes, he does.
How is that physically possible?
It requires a staggering feat of medieval engineering, brutal logistics, and just sheer willpower. Reynald ordered the construction of a small fleet. Sources suggest around 5 war galleys.
5 galleys.
But obviously they couldn't be built on the coast, which was heavily patrolled. They had to be constructed in secret.
So he builds them at the castle?
Yes. He brought skilled shipwrights and timber, likely sourced from the forests of Moab or even further north, directly to Kerak.
Wait, let me make sure I'm picturing this right. They are cutting the timber, shaping the hulls, and building these massive wooden warships inside a stone fortress surrounded by arid wadis.
Precisely. They used modular construction.
Modular, like snap-together parts.
Essentially, yes. Peg and hole joinery. They built the galleys in pieces, prefabricating them, basically.
That's genius.
They pitched the hulls to make them watertight right there in the courtyard of the castle. But once the components were finished, they faced the real challenge.
Transport.
Exactly. They had to strap these massive, heavy ship parts onto the backs of hundreds of camels and pack animals.
The logistics of that are terrifying. Camels can carry a lot of weight, maybe 300 to 400 pounds each, but we are talking about keels, masts, and heavy planking.
Very heavy planking.
And they have to haul this overland through some of the harshest, hottest, most arid terrain on Earth, all the way down the Wadi Araba to the Gulf of Aqaba.
Right.
You have to keep the animals hydrated. You have to protect the convoy from Bedouin raids. The failure rate for this kind of march should have been near 100%.
It really should have been a complete disaster, yet they succeeded.
Wow.
They reached the coast, seized the small port of Isla, reassembled the galleys, launched them into the Red Sea, and went on an absolute rampage.
It's just totally unchecked.
Completely unchecked. They operated with total impunity because the Ayyubids didn't even have a naval presence in the northern Red Sea. Nobody expected a fleet to materialize out of the desert.
I mean, why would you?
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
So Reynald's men attacked Muslim shipping, disrupted the vital maritime trade routes between Egypt and Arabia, and most shockingly, they targeted the pilgrimage traffic heading to Mecca.
The source notes they actually landed at port towns and threatened Jeddah.
Yes, they did.
Yeah.
Jeddah is the direct maritime gateway to Mecca itself. They were practically knocking on the door of the holiest site in Islam.
I have to ask, what was Reynald's actual endgame here? Was he trying to conquer Mecca? Because 5 galleys aren't going to hold the city.
No, definitely not.
Was he just trying to steal as much gold as possible and run? Or did he fundamentally misunderstand his enemy's absolute red lines?
I lean heavily toward the latter. Reynald was an opportunist, blinded by the prospect of plunder and the desire to inflict psychological damage.
So he just wasn't thinking it through.
Right. He likely thought he was executing a brilliant deep strike raid. But he wildly miscalculated the geopolitical fallout.
Because he went after the pilgrims.
He crossed a line that transformed him from a hostile combatant into a mortal enemy of the entire Islamic world.
Because he threatened the Hajj.
Exactly. In the Islamic world, the safety of the pilgrims, the Hajj, is inviolable. It is a core pillar of the faith.
You don't mess with that.
Never. By threatening those pilgrims, and by threatening the holy cities, Reynald struck at the very heart of Saladin's religious legitimacy.
Right, because if Saladin can't protect Mecca, who is he?
Exactly. If Saladin, the great unifier, could not protect the route to Mecca, his fragile coalition of emirs would shatter.
So Reynald basically forced his hand.
He handed Saladin the ultimate casus belli, the undeniable theological and political justification for total, uncompromising war.
And I imagine Saladin's response was not slow.
It was swift, and it was absolute. Saladin couldn't march an army into the Red Sea, obviously.
Right.
So he immediately ordered his brother in Egypt to dispatch a heavily armed Egyptian naval squadron.
To hunt them down.
Yes, they sailed down, hunted down Reynald's makeshift fleet, and cornered them. The Christian raiders were completely annihilated.
Just wiped out.
Those who weren't killed in the fighting were captured and brought back in chains. And Saladin made a very deliberate public point of making an example of them. They were executed.
Wow. No ransoms, no standard medieval hostage exchanges.
None. The theological outrage changed the fundamental nature of the conflict. Kerak was no longer just a strategic FOB on a map.
He's personal now.
Deeply personal.
Right.
Eradicating Kerak and destroying Reynald specifically became a matter of supreme honor and religious duty. Saladin actually swore a public, personal vow to kill Reynald with his own hands.
Which sets up the first major direct collision at the fortress itself. And the timing of this first strike in 1183 is so bizarre, it feels like it belongs in a movie.
It really does.
Saladin arrives with a massive siege train at the exact moment the Crusaders are throwing a party.
The Wedding Siege of 1183. It is one of the most surreal events of the medieval period.
Set the scene for us. Saladin marches thousands of troops up to the plateau and surrounds Kerak. But inside the castle, they aren't in a state of high alert, are they?
No, they are hosting a massive royal wedding. Humphrey of Toron, a major young noble, is marrying Isabella of Jerusalem, the king's half-sister.
So a huge portion of the Latin nobility of the Crusader kingdom is basically trapped inside the fortress.
Yes, they had traveled there for the wedding, bringing their retinues, their finest clothes, musicians, and massive amounts of food for the banquets.
And suddenly they are locked inside a stone box while a massive army surrounds them.
Right.
The juxtaposition is insane. Inside these immense, dark, vaulted stone halls, you have musicians playing, people in silk and jewels, massive feasts being laid out.
And outside, the ground is literally shaking.
Explain the mechanics of the siege going on outside. The source mentions trebuchets and mangonels. What is the actual difference between these weapons, and what are they doing to the castle?
Okay, so both are forms of medieval artillery, but they operate on completely different mechanical principles.
Okay.
A mangonel, often called a traction trebuchet, relies on a team of men pulling on ropes attached to a short arm to lever a longer arm forward, slinging a projectile.
So it's man-powered.
Yes. They are faster to fire but throw lighter stones.
Yeah.
A true counterweight trebuchet, which was becoming more prominent, uses a massive wooden box filled with earth or lead on the short end of a pivot arm.
Oh, right. Gravity does the work.
Exactly. When you drop that massive weight, it violently whips the long arm up, slinging a very heavy stone boulder, sometimes weighing hundreds of pounds in a high arc.
So you have these massive boulders flying through the air and smashing against the walls. The noise must have been deafening. Every impact would send shockwaves through the stone.
It would have been absolutely terrifying. But this is where Mick Prichter's GIS terrain analysis really illuminates the history.
How so?
Well, when you look at the topography of Kerak, it sits on a spur of rock, surrounded by wadis.
I'm glad you brought that up. What exactly is a wadi, for those who haven't been to the region, and why does it matter tactically?
Good question. A wadi is essentially a dry riverbed, or a steep ravine that only fills with water during heavy rains.
So it's a deep ditch.
A very deep, cliff-like ditch. Over millennia, the water carves these deep, sheer, cliff-like trenches into the landscape. Kerak is protected by these massive, plunging ravines on three sides.
Meaning you physically cannot march an infantry assault force up a sheer cliff?
Right. It nullifies numbers. Because of these wadis, Saladin could only position his siege engines and his assault troops on the northern and western approaches, the only flat ground.
And the Crusaders knew this.
Oh, they definitely knew. So they built incredibly thick curtain walls facing those exact directions. Saladin couldn't just storm the castle. He had to rely on a prolonged, heavy bombardment to try and batter the walls down.
Which brings us to the chivalric exchange. Right in the middle of this deafening bombardment, the Queen Mother, Maria Comnena, who is trapped inside, does something wild.
Yes, she does.
She has dishes of freshly prepared food from the wedding banquet sent out of the castle across the apocalyptic no-man's land directly to Saladin in his command tent.
It sounds like a myth, but it is recorded in the primary sources. And Saladin's response is equally striking.
What does he do?
He receives the food, thanks the messengers, and then inquires which specific tower of the massive castle is housing the newlyweds.
No way.
Yes, and when they point it out to him, he explicitly orders his siege engineers to redirect their trebuchets and mangonels.
He tells them to aim away.
He orders them to fire away from the bridal tower, ensuring the royal couple can consummate their marriage without heavy artillery crashing through their roof.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting. Let's dig into the military psychology of this, because I don't buy that this was just two nobles being polite.
It's definitely more complex than that.
Is this an act of genuine, heartfelt medieval chivalry? Or is this a highly calculated psychological warfare tactic?
I lean toward the latter.
Look at it from Saladin's perspective. Reynald is this brutal warlord who butchers unarmed pilgrims in the Red Sea. By sparing the newlyweds, is Saladin loudly proving to everyone, his own emirs, his soldiers, and the terrified crusaders inside, that he possesses total moral superiority.
It is absolutely a calculated piece of statecraft, masking a chivalry.
Brilliant.
Saladin was renowned for his adherence to the Furusiya, the Islamic martial code, which shared some similarities with European chivalry. But he was also a master manipulator of perception.
He knew how to play the PR game.
Very well. By demonstrating this incredible restraint, he was drawing a massive, highly visible contrast between his own civilized, measured conduct and Reynald's piratical barbarism.
Look at the guy you're working for kind of thing.
Exactly. He was isolating Reynald morally, essentially saying to the Crusader nobility inside, "Look at the madman you let lead you. I am a just ruler making war on a criminal, not on a bride and groom."
It's brilliant propaganda. But propaganda doesn't lift a siege, right? The bombardment continued on the rest of the walls. Ultimately, the wedding party is saved by external forces.
Yes, word of the siege had reached Jerusalem, and King Baldwin V mobilizes the royal field army.
Baldwin V is such a compelling figure here. We need to contextualize him for the listener. He is known as the Leper King.
Yes, Baldwin is one of the most tragic and heroic figures of the era. He contracted leprosy as a child.
Which is brutal.
By 1183, the disease was ravaging his body. Leprosy causes severe nerve damage, skin lesions, and physical deformities. He couldn't feel his extremities.
So riding a horse into battle would be almost impossible.
He often had to ride a horse with only one hand, or sometimes had to be carried in a litter. Yet, despite his body literally falling apart, his willpower was ironclad.
That's incredible.
He mustered a formidable force of knights from the religious orders, the Templars and Hospitallers, along with mounted and dismounted men-at-arms, and marched out into the desert to relieve Kerak.
I mean, imagine the loyalty it takes for an army of hardened knights to follow a teenager whose body is decaying into battle.
They respected him immensely because he never shirked his duty. And when Saladin's scouts reported that Baldwin's relief army was approaching, Saladin had to make a hard tactical choice.
He withdraws, doesn't he?
He had to. The very geography that made Kerak impossible to assault also made it a death trap for a besieging army.
How so?
If Saladin stayed, he risked getting his army pinned against the impregnable fortress walls and the deep wadis by Baldwin's approaching force.
Oh, like being caught between a rock and a hard place. Literally.
Exactly. He would be crushed between the hammer of the Crusader field army and the anvil of the castle walls. So, he executed a disciplined, strategic withdrawal.
So, on paper, the Crusaders win. Baldwin saves the castle, the nobility survives the wedding, but looking at the wider strategy, this win actually triggers a grueling cycle that is going to systematically bleed the Crusader kingdom to death.
Precisely. Saladin's withdrawal in 1183 wasn't a defeat, it was a repositioning. Because the very next year, in 1184, he comes right back.
And he's not messing around this time.
No, this time he isn't playing the chivalrous host. The 1184 siege is about total grinding attrition.
He brings heavier artillery. He starts aggressively burning the crops in the surrounding farmlands. He blocks the external wells. He's trying to literally asphyxiate the garrison.
And this is where the specific architectural genius of Kerak becomes the only thing standing between the defenders and death.
Tell me about the architecture.
When you look at Prichter's research on the castle's interior, you see these immense barrel-vaulted chambers cut deep into the rock.
Break that down mechanically for me. What does barrel-vaulted mean, and why is it necessary?
Okay, a barrel vault is an architectural element formed by the extrusion of a single curve. Essentially a continuous archway forming a half-cylinder roof.
Okay, I can picture that.
In medieval military architecture, a massive, thick stone barrel vault is incredibly strong. When a 100-pound boulder from a trebuchet hits the roof, the curve of the vault efficiently dissipates the kinetic energy down into the incredibly thick supporting walls, rather than collapsing inward.
So it absorbs the shock.
Yes. These dark, subterranean chambers allowed the garrison to survive the relentless, plunging artillery fire.
So you have hundreds of men, horses, and refugees crammed into these dark, claustrophobic stone tunnels. The heat of the Levantine summer is pressing down on the stone. The ground is shaking from artillery impacts day and night, but you can't survive on thick walls alone. You need water.
And that is the second brilliant feature of Kerak. The castle was equipped with immense, hidden subterranean cisterns.
Like underground pools.
Massive ones. These were plastered caverns carved out of the bedrock beneath the castle. They were designed to catch and store thousands of gallons of rainwater during the brief winter wet season.
Okay, so that's their lifeline.
Absolutely. During a siege, when the external wells were poisoned or blocked, the resilience of the entire garrison relied entirely on rationing the water in those black underground pools. If the cisterns run dry, the castle falls. Period.
It's just an agonizing way to fight a war. But what is Saladin actually trying to achieve here? If Kerak is this impregnable, why waste the rocks?
What's fascinating here is we see Saladin, the grand strategist.
Yeah.
Taking Kerak was actually the secondary objective.
Like, really? What was the primary objective?
His primary objective was the Crusader field army.
I'm struggling to picture this. How does throwing rocks at a castle in the desert target the field army in Jerusalem?
Through the brutal logic of attrition. Saladin knew that the Crusader kingdom simply could not afford to lose Kerak. It was their southern shield. Therefore, every time he laid siege to it, The king of Jerusalem was politically and militarily obligated to muster the field army and march out to relieve it.
Ah, I see.
And marching a medieval army across the hostile, arid environment of the Levant is a logistical nightmare.
It's exhaustingly expensive, right?
Extremely. You have to empty the royal treasury to pay the mercenaries. You have to feed thousands of men and horses. The heat exhausts the soldiers. The marching degrades the equipment.
So he's bleeding them dry.
Yes. Saladin is turning Kerak into a giant piece of bait. He surrounds the bait, waits for the Crusader army to exhaust itself marching out into the desert heat, and then, right before a pitched battle can occur, he simply slips away.
So in 1184, Baldwin IV and another commander, Guy of Lusignan, arrive with another massive relief army. And again, Saladin just packs up his tents and leaves.
Exactly. He hasn't lost anything but time and some rocks. But the Crusaders have spent massive, irreplaceable resources just to maintain the status quo.
It's a trap.
It is a calculated, vicious cycle. Provocation, siege, relief, and retreat. Every time the Crusaders run this sprint, their manpower pool shrinks, their treasury empties, and their logistical capacity degrades.
Let me use a military analogy here. If the Crusader kingdom is a human body, Saladin isn't trying to chop off its arm Kerak. He is acting like a virus, constantly triggering the body's immune system.
I like that analogy.
He forces the immune system, the field army, to overreact, to spike a fever over and over again until the entire body is just exhausted and ready to collapse.
That is a brilliant way to frame it. He is inducing systemic fatigue. And this relentless strategy of exhaustion sets the perfect fatal trap for the climax of the entire era.
Because they can't keep it up forever.
Right. Eventually, the Crusader army is going to be too tired, too poorly led, or too desperate to just relieve a siege and go home safely. They are going to have to fight a pitched battle on Saladin's terms.
Which brings us to the summer of 1187, the Battle of Hattin. This is the moment the immune system finally collapses.
Yes. July 1187 is the turning point of the Middle Ages in the Levant. Saladin uses the same bait tactic, but this time further north, besieging the town of Tiberias.
And things have changed in Jerusalem, too.
Yes, Baldwin IV has died by this point, and the kingdom is now ruled by King Guy of Jerusalem, and Guy takes the bait. But this time, he marches his army into a meticulously planned trap.
Explain the march to Hattin, because the logistics of this march dictate the outcome of the battle before a single sword is swung.
King Guy leads the entire Crusader field army. Estimates put it between 15,000 and 20,000 men.
That's everyone.
This is maximum effort. He has emptied every garrison he safely could. He marches them away from their secure, well-supplied water sources at Sephoria, out onto the arid, open plateau near the Horns of Hattin.
And it's July.
It is early July. The heat in the Levant in July is staggering.
We need to dwell on this. We are talking about men marching in medieval armor. A knight or a man-at-arms is wearing a padded gambeson, a heavy iron chainmail hauberk, an iron helm.
A lot of heavy gear.
They are carrying a shield, weapons. It's easily 50 to 60 pounds of gear in a 100-degree Fahrenheit heat. Without adequate water, the physiological toll of the dehydration, the heat stroke, is unimaginable.
And Saladin knows this perfectly. He is waiting with an army of over 30,000 troops, and his tactics here are utterly merciless.
He doesn't just charge them, does he?
No, he doesn't meet them in a clean cavalry charge. He uses the environment as his primary weapon.
How so? Walk me through it.
First, his light cavalry, the Mamluk horse archers, surround the Crusader column. They don't engage in melee. They use a tactic where they ride in continuous circles, pouring constant, harassing arrow fire into the Crusader ranks.
So the Crusaders are just taking hits.
Right. The Crusaders have to keep their shields up, they can't break formation, and they're constantly taking casualties. Second, Saladin's forces physically block the Crusaders from reaching the only nearby water source at the Sea of Galilee.
Oh, man, and then he lights the fires.
Yes, the plateau is covered in dry scrub brush. Saladin orders his men to set fire to the brush upwind of the Crusader army.
That is brutal.
The wind blows thick, choking smoke and intense heat directly into the parched, exhausted ranks of the Christians.
It's a literal nightmare. You are baking inside your chainmail. You haven't had water in 24 hours. You can't breathe because of the smoke. Your horses are dying of thirst, and arrows are constantly falling out of the sky.
The Crusader military machine suffered a complete systemic failure.
They just broke down.
Driven mad by thirst and exhaustion, the infantry eventually broke formation and scrambled up the Horns of Hattin, seeking safety, leaving the knights unprotected.
And without the infantry.
Without infantry support to absorb the arrow fire, the knights' horses were slaughtered. King Guy ordered desperate, heroic cavalry charges to try and break Saladin's lines, but they were swarmed and repulsed. By the end of the day, the Crusader army simply ceased to exist.
And the loss wasn't just men, was it? It was their most sacred talisman. They lost the true cross.
Yes. The Crusaders carried a relic into battle, a piece of wood they believed was from the cross Jesus was crucified on.
A huge deal for morale.
Massive. It was housed in a massive shrine and carried by the Bishop of Acre. It was their ultimate symbol of divine favor. When the Ayyubid forces captured it, it didn't just break the Crusader army physically, it broke them spiritually.
The battle ends, the field is littered with the dead, and we arrive at the dramatic climax of the personal rivalry that started this whole deep dive.
The tent scene.
Right. The surviving high command of the Crusader army is captured and brought to Saladin's command tent, King Guy of Jerusalem, and the warlord of Kerak himself, Reynald of Châtillon.
And the historical accounts of this tent scene are highly specific because the cultural rules of hospitality in the Middle East dictated what happened next.
What were the rules?
Saladin receives them. King Guy is exhausted and terrified. Saladin, observing the Bedouin codes of hospitality, offers King Guy a cup of iced rose water.
Which means something very specific.
In this cultural context, offering a prisoner food or drink was a sacred, unbreakable guarantee of their safety and eventual ransom. By offering the cup, Saladin was assuring King Guy that he would live.
So Guy takes the cup, he drinks, and then he hands it to Reynald, who is standing next to him, parched.
And Saladin instantly interrupts. The chroniclers note that Saladin turns to his interpreter and says very clearly, "Remind the king that it is he who gave him drink, not I."
That is a terrifying legal distinction.
It was a death sentence. Saladin was stating, legally and morally, within his own framework, that he had granted no guarantee of safety to Reynald. The cup was not offered by the Sultan's hand.
Because the vow he made years ago after the Red Sea raids, after the attacks on the pilgrims, was still active.
Exactly. Saladin confronted Reynald directly. He listed his crimes, his broken treaties, his blasphemies, his attacks on the unarmed.
Did Reynald beg for his life?
No. Reynald, true to his aggressive nature to the very end, reportedly remained defiant. And then, fulfilling his vow, Saladin drew his sword.
He did it himself?
The exact mechanics vary in the chronicles. Some accounts, like Imad al-Din, suggest Saladin struck the first blow to Reynald's shoulder and his bodyguards rushed in to finish it, while others say Saladin personally beheaded him in one strike.
But the result is the same.
But the historical outcome is identical. Reynald of Châtillon was executed on the spot.
It's the brutal, inevitable end to a bitter rivalry. But I want to zoom out because the impact of Hatton goes so far beyond the execution of one warlord.
Oh, absolutely.
If we go back to our immune system analogy, Hatton was the complete destruction of the kingdom's immune system. Once you annihilate the central command structure and the field mobility of an army, what happens to all those massive fortified castles left behind?
They become tombs.
Tombs.
This is the exact strategic reality of medieval warfare. A castle, no matter how thick its walls, no matter how deep its cisterns, cannot survive indefinitely without a field army.
Because no one is coming to save them?
Exactly. The entire defensive doctrine relies on the premise that if you hold out long enough, the king will march an army to relieve you. After Hatton, there was no army.
So Saladin just mops up.
Saladin's forces rapidly swept across the Levant. Almost every major city and fortress fell with barely a fight. Acre, Jaffa, Nablus, and within months, the ultimate prize, Jerusalem itself, capitulated.
The holy city falls. But, down in the south, completely isolated on its rocky spur, surrounded by a rapidly expanding sea of Ayyubid territory, Kerak is still holding out.
Reynald was dead, but the fortress he commanded remained defiant. The command of that massive installation fell to his widow, Stephanie of Milly.
We are moving into the final phase of this conflict, the siege of 1187 to 1188 or 1189. Stephanie of Milly is an incredible figure.
She really is.
She is left to command this fortress, and the internal conditions must have been absolutely apocalyptic.
You have to imagine the sheer logistical strain. As Saladin's forces had swept through the surrounding territories after Hatton, Christian refugees from all over Transjordan had fled in terror to the perceived safety of Kerak's massive walls.
So it's overcrowded.
Incredibly overcrowded. So Stephanie doesn't just have a garrison to feed. She has thousands of desperate, terrified civilians. The fortress is swollen far beyond its normal capacity.
And the mental toll of that.
And the psychological burden is immense. She knows with absolute certainty that no relief army is coming. The king is captured, Jerusalem's gone, the army is dead.
The tragedy of those defenders is profound. They are locked in those dark, barrel-vaulted tunnels for over a year.
More than 12 months.
More than 12 months of total isolation. They are relying purely on the strength of the stone and whatever rainwater is left in the hidden cisterns, staring out over the wadis every single day, knowing full well that no banners are ever going to appear on the horizon.
It is a testament to the sheer, stubborn physical engineering of the castle that they lasted as long as they did.
When did Saladin start the siege?
Saladin began his investment of Kerak late in 1187, leaving a detachment to blockade it while he campaigned elsewhere. They didn't capitulate until late 1188, possibly early 1189.
They just ran out of everything.
They eventually surrendered under negotiated terms when their supplies simply ceased to exist, when the grain bins were empty and the cisterns ran dry.
Did Saladin execute them?
No, actually. Saladin, recognizing their bravery and having already achieved his strategic goals, allowed the survivors safe passage to Christian-held Antioch.
And here is the bitter irony that I think really defines this whole story for me. For decades, the Crusaders poured immense wealth, labor, and blood into making Kerak an impregnable, terrifying offensive weapon.
Right.
And when it finally falls, it doesn't get torn down, it gets repurposed.
That is the ultimate twist of fate. Saladin didn't dismantle it. He immediately repaired the damage from his own siege engines, strengthened the walls further, and stationed a formidable Muslim garrison inside.
He just moved in.
The very architectural strength that made Kerak such a powerful Crusader asset now perfectly served Saladin's new empire. It was instantly transformed from a Crusader offensive springboard into an Ayyubid defensive linchpin.
That's fascinating.
By holding Kerak, Saladin locked down that entire desert frontier, securing the critical communication lines between Damascus and Egypt against any future European incursions.
You spent half a century building the perfect lock, and now your enemy holds the only key. But the fall of Kerak and Jerusalem didn't just change the local map. The shockwaves from Hattin hit Europe like an earthquake.
The geopolitical fallout was staggering. When the news of the total destruction at Hattin and the loss of the True Cross and Jerusalem finally reached Rome, it sent shockwaves through Christendom.
And that triggers a response.
Pope Gregory VIII almost immediately issued a papal bull calling for the Third Crusade.
Which is the big one.
This is the massive expedition that brings the heavyweights of European royalty to the Levant. King Richard the Lionheart of England, King Philip II of France, and Emperor Frederick Barbarossa.
It's like the Avengers assembling.
It entirely changed the balance of power in the region yet again, plunging the Levant into years of renewed massive warfare. Though, notably, despite all their efforts, they never managed to retake Jerusalem or Kerak.
Fast forward through the centuries. We've talked about the Crusaders, the Ayyubids, the later Mamluks who expanded the castle, the Ottomans. All of them utilized this incredible fortress. Let's bring the timeline right up to the present day.
Right to today.
Because the sheer physical mass of the stone that dictated all these horrific historical events is still sitting on that exact same plateau today.
Which is exactly what makes Mick Prichter's research so compelling. He traveled to Al-Kerak to physically examine the modern battlefield.
And what's it like now?
And what a modern traveler experiences there is a profound, almost jarring connection to the physical realities of the 12th century.
Prichter describes this incredible juxtaposition. You have this massive medieval ruin, but it's not sitting empty in some roped-off wasteland.
No, it's very much alive.
The bustling, modern Jordanian town of Al-Kerak has grown directly around and right up to the very edges of the ancient medieval walls. You're standing in a modern city listening to car horns, but you're looking up at a 12th century war machine.
And that physical evidence tells the silent story of the sieges. When you walk the perimeter with Prichter's GIS data in mind, you can clearly see the surviving Crusader-era towers on the north and the west.
Why specifically the north and west?
Because these are the exact, specific spots where Saladin had to position his mangonels and counterweight trebuchets. Because the geography of the plunging wadis allowed no other approach.
You can still see the impact.
You can read the layers of history in the stonework itself. The thick, rough-hewn, dark blocks of the original Crusader construction, overlaid, repaired, and modified by the more refined, lighter masonry of the Ayyubids and the later Mamluks.
This raises an important question. Standing there, how does the physical geography change your understanding of the events? Because reading about a siege in a book feels very abstract.
It makes the history visceral. You can read that an assault failed, But when you stand on those ramparts, looking out over the deep, terrifying troughs of the wadis toward the Dead Sea, you instantly understand why a direct infantry assault was a suicidal impossibility.
The land itself fights you.
The land itself rejects the attacker. You understand why Saladin had to employ strategic patience, why he had to starve them. You understand why thousands of men bled and died for control of this one specific, narrow spur of rock.
It all clicks into place.
The unyielding geography of the Levant dictated every single tactical and strategic decision made over half a decade.
I want you, the listener, to try and visualize that experience right now. Imagine standing right at the edge of those cliff-like drops, feeling the dry, hot wind coming up off the valley floor.
It's powerful.
Imagine walking down the stone steps into those dark, subterranean barrel-vaulted stables, feeling the sudden, dramatic drop in temperature as the massive stone walls block out the harsh desert sun.
Just tracing the history.
Imagine running your hand over the rough stone and tracing the actual, physical battle scars, the shattered blocks and impact craters left by 12th-century siege boulders over 800 years ago. It brings the ghosts of Reynald, of Châtillon, and Saladin right into the present room with you.
It is a profound historical experience. It reminds us forcefully that history isn't just an abstract collection of dates and ideas. It is heavily influenced and often entirely constrained by the physical environments we build.
And as we wrap up our deep dive into the Sieges of Kerak, I want to leave you with a final lingering thought to mull over on your own. We spent an hour talking about how the castle protected Reynald, how it allowed him to project power,
Right.
but did it also curse him? Does the sheer, undeniable impregnability of a massive fortress fundamentally alter the psychology of the commander living inside it?
That is a fascinating, deeply human psychological premise.
Think about it. Did the massive defiant walls of Kerak, those plunging cliffs, those endless hidden cisterns that kept him alive through multiple sieges, give Reynald of Châtillon a fatal, false sense of invincibility?
It's highly possible.
Did sitting behind an unbreachable wall for a decade make him so insulated, so arrogant, that it ultimately goaded him into provoking an entire unified empire? An empire he fundamentally could never hope to defeat once he was forced out onto an open battlefield at Hattin.
Because eventually he had to come out.
Exactly. Did the stone itself make him believe he was untouchable, right up until the exact moment he had to step out from behind it and accept a cup of water in a tent?
A fortress can be a formidable physical shield, but it can also become a very dangerous psychological trap. It's a brilliant question to end on.
And on that note, we are going to conclude today's deep dive. I want to once again extend a massive thank you to our primary source for this exploration. This entire discussion, from the architectural breakdowns to the strategic analysis, was grounded on the extensive, deep research study conducted by Mick Prichter.
Yes, incredible work.
If you want to see the GIS maps we discussed, read his primary source analyses, or plan your own historical expedition to the Levant, I highly encourage you to visit his site at battlefieldtravels.com.
It's highly recommended.
Not only does he have incredibly detailed work on the sieges of Kerak, but you can access additional information and hundreds of other meticulously detailed battle and campaign studies from across military history.
It is an invaluable resource for anyone who wants to truly understand how history was fought, suffered, and won on the ground.
So the next time you think of a historical event as being clean, binary, and precise, remember the muddy, complex, deeply human reality of Kerak. Remember the calculated psychological warfare masking as chivalry, the cold rose water masking the executioner's sword, and the massive, silent stone walls that shaped the fall of an entire kingdom. Until next time.